Hi, everyone. I hope that wherever you are, you're safe and well. I'm Marilyn Zahour. I'm the CEO and founder of Cosmic Centaurs. We are a leadership and organizational development firm based here in the GCC, and particularly our hometown of Dubai. And today you're joining us for the 7th annual Cosmic Conference, which has been a wonderful 3-week virtual conference that started on March 25th and ends at the end of this week on April 17th. It's actually hard to believe we're just a few days away from wrapping this up. Our conference this year was titled Grounded and Limitless, Leading Organizations That Survive and Thrive. And throughout the conference, we've been hoping that we've supported leaders as they manage prolonged uncertainty. At the core of this duality that is in our title is this idea that being grounded and limitless is about both staying clear-eyed about reality, but also continuing to build for the future. And we've brought together more than 20 leaders, experts, and academics to collectively make sense of what leadership requires in moments like these across 3 themes. Week 1 was about enduring. We talked about how to survive the first wave of uncertainty. The second week was about adapting, how we can evolve in response to everything that is changing around us. And this week is about thriving, how we turn the lessons learned in crisis into a competitive advantage, emerging stronger, more innovative, and better prepared for the future. Our speaker, Peter, and I, who I'm going to introduce in just a minute, we'd love for you to actively participate in this session. Share your reflections, your questions, your experiences in the chat, and we'll make sure to find time to respond to some of them. If you find value in this session and want to give back, we have one ask. It'll take 4 minutes. We're conducting research to capture how leaders in our region are navigating uncertainty because we think that others around the world can learn from us. So did Peter, by the way, and we'll talk today about the research that he did. Our team will drop a link in the chat to our Leading in the Arab World survey. If you have 5 minutes to spare, it would mean the world to us. Now onwards to today's sessions, Lives and Livelihoods, what we can learn from the UAE Crisis Management Playbook. I'm extremely pleased to be welcoming Peter Zemsky today to discuss this.
Thank you, Peter. That's great.
Well, let me introduce you really quick. Peter is a professor of strategy and innovation at INSEAD. He's the CEO of Lexarius, which leverages generative AI to deliver tailored replay conversations that enable employees to develop critical skills and behaviors. Professor Zemsky is the Lilly Chaired Professor of Strategy and Innovation at INSEAD. He served in the school's leadership team from 2010 to 2023, including a decade as Deputy Dean and Dean of Innovation. He brings deep, multifaceted expertise in innovation strategy to his activities as an educator, researcher, and institutional leader. He is particularly passionate about business strategy in the face of disruption, including how to drive business value from advances in digital and AI technology. He directs and teaches the strategy in the age of AI and digital disruption, business strategy and financial performance, and the Chief Strategy Officer program. He also studied the UAE's COVID response in depth, engaging directly with decision makers, scientists, and experts involved in shaping that response. And today we're hoping to learn from him.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we move into this week, week 3, which is what we're exploring, we're trying to figure out how organizations, and in this case, a nation, can not only endure and adapt, but really take the lessons from a crisis and emerge stronger because of it. And I don't think there's a better place and a better example to be looking at than the UAE. The UAE is evidently one of the best-in-class examples of this in practice. It didn't just recover from the global pandemic, but it emerged stronger. It saw an economic acceleration with growth, investment, and global confidence all rising post-COVID-19. 2022, GDP grew by up to 8%. It was one of the fastest to rebound globally. Tourism surpassed pre-COVID levels up until the last few weeks of geopolitical disruptions. And the UAE has become a top destination for global wealth, attracting more than 6,700 millionaires in 2024. And, the UAE really stands out because it balanced something incredibly difficult in that crisis. And that's what we're here to learn from today, how to both protect lives and sustain livelihoods. And it's easy in hindsight to look at the outcomes and assume that everything was clear. But if we all remember what the world was like, actually Cosmic Centaurs and our first conference were born during that time, and no one had any answers, no one had any information. and we were all under immense pressure with real trade-offs with people's lives at stake. So today we want to unpack what made the response effective, how were decisions made in uncertainty, and what we can learn today from that playbook as we navigate our own challenges. So Peter, I'm going to jump right in with my first question. Let's start by going back to that moment in time. You spent quite a bit of time studying the UAE's COVID crisis response closely. What, in your perspective, made their approach so effective? And how did it compare to what you're seeing elsewhere?
Yeah, great. Happy to jump in. First of all, it is going to be a great example of how you thrive in a crisis. And also kudos for you for picking the topic. One of the things that frustrates me is there's a lot you can learn from a crisis. And I think people suffered so much in COVID. Everybody just wanted to turn the page and didn't really pause to learn. And that's one reason I wanted to do this case study. Of course, it was easy because I was in Dubai at the time. And as you said, it was a great example. I think just to set the stage a little bit, it's been great after COVID. I think it's important to remember things were only so-so in Dubai before, right? So yes, it was the #1 flight hub, #4 tourist destination. So it was strong, but the economy was kind of sluggish. It had never really fully bounced back from some of the setbacks in the financial crisis. So real estate values were down about 25% from 2014 to 2019. And so if you remember, that whole Expo 2020 that gets caught up in COVID was like a big bet to reignite growth. I mean, it's interesting that whereas COVID is going to disrupt the Expo to some extent, it actually does even more to reignite the growth. Okay, now to get to your question, I think when you start to dig into an effective crisis response, you see two things. One is what you said, which is, yes, you're going to see things about decision-making. We're going to talk about that. But just as much, it's the cards you have in your hand. It's what have you built up beforehand? What strengths do you have? And really the Dubai effectiveness is going to be both of those. But you asked about decision-making, so let's definitely start around that. It's just a crisis, as you can see, for those who are in it. It puts your decision-making at a test. You've got to be fast, but you're making high-stakes decisions. So you want to be data-driven, but at the same time, you need leaders who can make judgments. You've got to coordinate quickly. And again, you've got to learn fast because the situation is changing on the ground. So I think the key thing in Dubai at the very beginning is setting up the right decision structures. So, okay, the first thing they did that you'd expect in the UAE, they set up the very top, right? There is a supreme committee chaired by Sheikh Mansour bin Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. So the very top of the house is running this. But then the second thing you need is expertise, right? So how are you going to really bring the right experts in to work on that? And so they formed this command and control center, bringing in a key set of doctors, people running the healthcare system to concentrate the advice to the Supreme Committee, but also the implementation, the analysis, and they got that structure right. And we can unpack that. And I think maybe just to tie to the themes, again, we talked to everybody on that command and control center, and it was an amazing formative experience for them. They learned so much. But one of the most telling things at the beginning, the leadership came in and gave them their mandate, and it was explicitly, you're doctors, you need to take care of lives, but also livelihoods. And so it really framed the decision-making. And again, you asked about other places. Other places either didn't have coherent decision-making, lots of fighting, lots of back and forth, lots of confusion for people, or they were overly focused on one or the other, especially lives, right? So in retrospect, the COVID had a big impact on education, on the economy, and people didn't get that balance right. And so doing that right away, very, very telling.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite incredible to be able to give that sense of direction because, we've spoken a lot about it over the last few weeks. In environments that are uncertain and therefore unpredictable, the only things that you can predict or have control over are the non-negotiables. And to set kind of that direction, I think created the space or the container within which then this group and all of the actions that they took could create meaning and deliver value. You spoke about this governance system that was put in place. I would love for you to unpack it. I mean, first of all, you gave us a little bit of a glimpse of all of these different people being brought in together, from doctors, scientists, policymakers, so quite a diverse group of people. That's always the dream team, of course, but then it's not easy to make these people collaborate and make decisions together. Can you double click on the specifics of how that was enabled?
Right. So fascinating. Again, things are in a hurry. You got to put this committee in place, but are you going to pick the right people or not? So it's very interesting. Dr. Aisha Moran, so there's a key person working with the Supreme Committee who was looking at the structure. At the same time, there was a group of these doctors and policymakers who were doing a white paper trying to think through how you're going to manage this. And both of them came up simultaneously with the idea that you needed a central command and control center. And they connected, and they quickly made the judgment at the Supreme Committee that these were the right people because they had the depth of knowledge. But again, when they looked at the white paper, they were really thinking about pragmatically, how do we actually do this in practice, not just the science? So again, getting the right people is going to be important. And in fact, actually, this is one of this Thrive, because they had the right people running this and they had just an incredibly formative experience. Afterwards, those people become amazing leaders that they leverage across healthcare in Dubai and elsewhere. One of the other things, the relationship, I think, between these, I mean, these were, it was chaired by the president of MBRU, the big medical university. But still, most of these people wouldn't have dealt with the very top sheikhs. And yet they found they had a relationship where they were able to debate and push back and actually have that psychological safety where you can, challenge and debate and get good decision making. So they really created that kind of environment. Again, in terms of things you're leveraging, I think in Dubai, or the UAE in general, you've got that great public-private partnership. So again, just remember, because you had to bring public and private together in the committee, the biggest challenge you had was your medical system could get overwhelmed. And if it gets overwhelmed, people die. And therefore, you've got to shut down your economy and you lose livelihoods. The more you can coordinate your medical system across public and private, the faster you can open up with confidence and protect lives and livelihoods. So again, really important to get those working relationships together. But I think the key thing is to streamline it, right? Even an efficient government like Dubai, it's still got lots of committees, lots of departments. In a crisis, you've got to streamline and centralize much more.
Yes, absolutely. And you spoke to us a little bit earlier about also leveraging what you have. There's one of the principles that in entrepreneurship is like bird in hand, is like leverage what is already existing. And of course, the UAE had a lot that it could leverage, but it's also about thinking about bringing these things together. What was already present that the UAE had developed in peacetime that it was then able to leverage and extract value from in that moment?
Let me try and cover quite a few things, quite telling. The digital infrastructure they'd invested in. I think I've even talking to people like, we weren't sure why we were doing this. And then we discovered by knowing where people were, what the outbreaks were, where people were congregating and how that correlated to the spread of the disease, that gave them rich models. But it wasn't just the hard stuff, the communication. And again, we'll get into the current crisis later, but if you look around the world, social media was not helpful in so many places. So much misinformation, so much fear. And again, as we can debate, exactly how you should play this, but clearly social media in a crisis can be counterproductive. And so you've got to both manage that and be really proactive on your communication. And again, I think Dubai and the UAE had a strong credibility in their leadership. That's just going to be absolutely essential. I talked about public-private partnership that had been established over years. Yeah, and again, they had been making the investments they needed in their healthcare system as well. So they had a lot of costs. Actually, maybe one anecdote. Of course, one of the biggest advantages they're going to have is Emirates Airlines, right? They're taking the seats out, they're using it for supply chain. But the other thing, if you don't know, Emirates had one of the leading cold storage supply chains for moving chilled product by air. Guess who needed that? All the vaccine makers, Pfizer. And so you know, by coordinating that, playing that card well, that's one reason Dubai and the UAE is going to have great access to vaccines, great people coming in who couldn't get vaccines in their home country to do that here.
Yes, absolutely. I think this question of all the extra quote unquote capacity or capabilities that they had, as you said, we didn't know why we had them, but suddenly we realized. Just a fun fact, I don't know if you're familiar with this score. Yeah. There's something called an Altman Z-score. It's really old. It's from the 60s. And essentially, it's a way to kind of score publicly traded companies or where you have access to their financial data. That was introduced to predict whether a company would collapse or thrive in the next 2 years. And in a crisis, obviously, it beats any stock price in terms of predicting the future. And one of the things that it looks like is this optionality piece. Like, do we have this slack? Do we have this extra capacity? Obviously, in terms of cash, if you're looking at a financial statement, to then reinvest into whatever emerges as the current need or the right next thing to do. So it, you know, definitely the UAE had a lot that it could leverage from that perspective. You know, the name of your session, the name of our conference is all about taking things that sometimes, as you said, in some countries where we focused on livelihoods or we focused on lives, that focus is what ended up having unintended negative consequences. There were a lot of trade-offs to be made. In addition to the partnership with the private sector, what were some of the hardest trade-offs that leaders had to make, and what tools did they put in place, or governance, or risk matrix, or anything that allowed them to constantly reevaluate that trade-off?
Yeah, I'd say, well, let me just highlight three big ones. Of course, one is when you make a mistake. So obviously, Dubai or the UAE closed down hard early, which is actually what you want to do because your medical system's not available. They opened up pretty quick, a little bit too quick. So one of the things is, as much as you try and follow the science, as you said, you will get things wrong. And it is just really important to be able to say and explain to your stakeholders, oh, sorry, we thought we could open up. We need to go lock, we're sorry, go down again. So that's super important. And again, if I think a little bit about what happened in some of the big Asian countries, they got locked into certain policies and couldn't lose face about changing. So anyway, there's a willingness to change. I think maybe the most important one is around schooling. So after COVID, I think one of the tragedies, as people looked back, is you realized all of that time outside of school costs the kids learning and development and mental health. And one of the interesting things as we dug into the records and the debates is because of some of that framing about lives and livelihoods, they had a really robust discussion about how long do we close the schools. And again, you see it in the current environment wrestling with that. And then again, they were more forward-looking in terms of getting schools back open. And again, it's about having the confidence that, okay, if we open schools, it might lead to an acceleration of spread, but we can pick that up fast enough and we can take mitigating actions. And of course, the last one was Expo. So they made this big bet on Expo. They put a lot of money on the table. And when do we open it? And again, it then plays into this thriving. They're doing this great job managing it, and so that they're going to be able to be ahead of the curve. And Expo coming at the end of 21, early, lots of debate, lots of analysis. When can we do it? And again, getting that right is just building that reputation, right? Because again, as much as it's a crisis is on the one hand, leveraging what you've got, but also you can make new resources, right? So the credibility, the yeah, just the new people who come to Dubai, the press they got from influencers, it actually built the momentum in the area tremendously.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had just moved like a year prior to Dubai when COVID happened. And, you know, when you first come to Dubai, it used to be, you're like, oh, I'll be here for a couple of years, we'll see. And going through the pandemic, I was like, I'm never leaving because I just, I mean, obviously these were very difficult decisions. No one got every single one of them right, but it sounded like the UAE did get every single one of them right to me, you know, as just a person observing as a resident and a citizen, and like now you know, a citizen at heart, and it really kind of solidified everybody's trust and faith in this place and in the ability of leadership here to kind of just figure out the right way forward. I mean, for sure. And one of the reasons we definitely wanted to have this session is, again, Dubai shows time after time, and the UAE, its ability to emerge strong post-crisis. And there's a playbook there, and you were the one to study it with them. And so maybe if we were to, obviously today's crisis is not the same, but if we were to try and extract, like, what are the differences fundamentally, but also what can we learn from past response to crisis that we could apply today?
Yeah, so I think it's also, I'll take a little time also to play up similarities and differences. I think that is interesting to what we're seeing now. But let me start with your question around what you shared was the trust that you built with the government, right? And it's just so important. And especially when you've got threats to your life, that trust is very, very salient. So usually the playbook around trust is it's got key drivers. So obviously one is competence. People need to believe that you're able to defend them, you're able to make good decisions. But again, you also need to be transparent. People want to understand some of what's going on. So they're saying, like in the current environment, this is how many missile attacks there were. There's a lot of transparency there. But also empathy, right? If you think about some of the caring for the people who had been injured, some of that stuff, super, super important for building trust, right? It's you want leaders who aren't just competent and transparent, but actually care about you. And so I'll give you one example from this CCC. They picked up, right, in these lockdowns, there were some families where people had mental illnesses in their children or physical disabilities where this was really hard. And they picked that up and they took it on themselves and think, okay, how can we adapt our policies to take into account the extra suffering of those people? Anyway, that ability to show empathy with the competence is huge. So again, that playbook, super important. One difference is, the COVID was a global pandemic. And so it was a real opportunity to grow your followers, your base, right? Because you could outperform. Here, unfortunately, this crisis, the certain thing, the current conflict is impacting this region. So in that way, I think one of the key things for the government today is to sustain that resource. It's the people like you and many people who are really bought in and want to keep believing, and they really just need to, and again, there's a lot of momentum there. They've built up this huge thing. The danger for them is to lose that environment. And again, because they also have somewhat less control over the crisis, it becomes even more today about bouncing back strong, right? So there's obviously a lot of work going on about what do we do as this thing wraps up, and how do we bring it back strong? So again, there's similarities and differences in these crises for sure.
And what would you have, as a private sector leader looking at the story, what can I extract that I can apply today? Of course, they were managing at a different scale and at the scale of a nation, but maybe what are some reflexes or some lessons that I could take into my own leadership today?
So clearly your decision-making processes, right? So there's, the more stable the time is, the more you can split up decision-making and stuff. In a crisis, when you need fast decision-making, you've got to have different structures. Now, it's actually quite healthy, because learning how to do that kind of fast decision making, even in regular times, you'll benefit from that. But you do need to rethink your decision processes. That's for sure. You definitely need to think about the dashboards you have going, right? So what is the key information you need for this crisis? So again, around the world, energy shortages are coming, prices are spiking. How are you following that? How are you adapting your production mix to these shifting price signals, right? So that's a very particular piece of this, and you need to have the right dashboards. What can I say? Okay, maybe the last one is, if you're going to be agile and react fast and make good decisions and implement them, you've got to be much more horizontal, right? So having lots of departments fighting, it's never good. Here it's disastrous. And so that, again, that's going to be important. I would also say, though, these are the things you have to build beforehand, right? So a lot of times in business, you got these trade-offs between, I can just push and make good money today, or I can invest for the future and treat my people well. But in a time of crisis, if you have neglected your people and they're not really committed and they don't fully trust you, it's going to cost you. So again, that's something to watch out for.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple of notes here. Last week, we had a great session with the CEO of Astrolabs, who spoke to us about how he built a strong leadership team in peacetime that ended up being, extremely leveraged, let's say, in this particular moment. So for listeners, they can go back and listen to the CEO of a private professional services firm speak of his own experience there. And actually, Peter, I want to take us to that because, this is a crisis that we all hope this particular crisis will end soon. But we are in an era of polycrisis. So, a lot of what I hear also from leaders, tomorrow we have Loïc Moutot, who used to be the CEO of the global CEO of Mars Pet Care. And he's going to tell us that essentially we no longer, crisis used to be something that had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we would return to something. But we are now in constant situations of managing crises. So let's talk about the capabilities that we need to develop. So you said it's good to have these in peacetime. Of course, today is a very acute crisis, but AI is a crisis for all firms. We all have to figure out what we're going to do about that. Economic and geopolitical instability is the norm, even if you're not a global firm today. So I want us to talk a little bit of, we've learned a lot from the response of the UAE. Let's talk about preparation. And you kind of brought us into that naturally. We still have to continue investing in our organization so they're ready for the future. Obviously, past the peak of the crisis, if our survival is more certain. Let's now talk about how we do that. Yesterday, I had what I call a midway keynote together with Tala. We spoke about resilience and what it means, because a lot of us think that resilience is about surviving crises, but actually some of the best definitions of organizational resilience, including Gary Hamel's, is a capability that is within the system that enables organizations to actually reinvent themselves before a crisis hits them. And so from a capability perspective, how do we prepare people, systems, organizations to respond effectively, because more crises are inevitably coming?
Right, I'll touch on two very different things. One is just that, what do you need for an organizational culture, which is partly what you're asking for this new extra turbulent times, but then also a little bit about the formal processes around crisis, which I think to some extent are dysfunctional. So I'll do both of those. But clearly for general agility and stuff, curiosity, learning mindset is huge. Again, not necessarily from a business school, I not necessarily mean formal learning, but it's the ability to constantly think about, okay, we're executing our strategy. I understand what's supposed to happen, what's actually happening, and am I empowered to actually think about what we need to do differently? So how fast are individuals and teams and functions and the whole organization learning? Because you're not in a stable environment. The world is complicated. You can hire the most expensive consultants and the brightest people, and they'll come up with a great plan, but it's never going to go according to plan, right? So so, is your organization trying things and learning fast? So that kind of culture, and again, creating the slack where you've got the right level of human capital there. You've given people that kind of empowerment. That's going to be huge. So that's really on the cultural side. Then the other side, more boring but still important. So organizations have all these traumas, cybersecurity problems, fines for risk management, health and safety. And so each of these little mini crises or problems leads to a process. And the dangers, of course, the cyber, the risk, all of this stuff becomes kind of box checking and formulaic if you're not careful. But more importantly, it's all siloed. So you have all these, and a real crisis is transversal. So again, I just saw this. This is not my main field, but I've now gotten super curious. If anyone's interested, there's a new global resilience standard, version 101 is out. Take a look at that. It really, because this is something that I've been seeing, I couldn't quite articulate it, but a bunch of experts in the area really came out and said, look, if you're going to have effective resilience systems, you need to integrate across these silos, and you've got to move away from just the bureaucratic box ticking. You've really got to run simulations and see if people behave correctly. So it's super, super interesting. So I think there's work to be done in that area.
Oh, that is really interesting. I asked ChatGPT, I was like, what is the global resilience standard? It's giving me a bit of a read. And actually looking at it and just reacting really live, because I didn't know you were going to mention this, is actually that it looks across everything from leadership to culture to strategy, people, processes, and outside of the firm to partnerships as well. Actually, our midway keynote yesterday was a lot about this, Peter. It was, people say, like, I understand the need for adaptability, and I understand the need for managing the present, but also investing in the future. I get it. And as a leader, I attempt to be intentional about these things all the time. I just don't know how to integrate it into the organization, like into the system, right? And oftentimes it's like there aren't enough good examples of what does that sound like practically. Obviously, whether it's your experience on looking at resilience and crises, but also in entrepreneurship, do you have any favorite practices that you can say, look, here's how I've seen companies be really good at thinking about the future, and these are practical ways that you can, or really small things that you can integrate into how you run your firm?
So my core discipline is strategy. So why don't I talk about that piece? So
Sure.
Definitely the principles of strategy, I've been teaching this for 30 years, haven't changed that much. We still need to create and capture value, but the process, the way you should make strategy has been transformed, right? And so it's going to be exactly this balance. You like these, planning versus agility, right? And so again, there's that old line by Eisenhower, plans are useless, planning is essential, right? So you don't get rid of the planning. So you try and work this out, you work on scenarios, but, and this is the key thing, the balance has to shift. Less time planning out 3-year things and much more processes where you're looking at this on a rolling basis. And so that's super important. And again, you mentioned AI. I mean, no webinar should not have some AI in it, but AI is going to be huge because again, AI, of course, it makes a lot of intelligence tasks cheap. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's not as good as humans, but it is fast, right? So the thing to remember about AI is it's both cheap and fast. And again, that matters a lot in a crisis, and it matters a lot when you have to constantly redo your strategy. So bringing AI in so that you're able to both use it to monitor what's happening in the market, what are people saying about my product, to quickly update your risk analysis and your mitigators. So you can really, that balance between planning and agility, AI, if you pick up the right tools, it can make your strategizing much faster and make it easier to integrate the formulation, the execution.
Yeah, I really love that. I also think it can just keep track of time better than humans. So because when we make a plan and then we go to try and execute it, a month passes by, we're really not in the mood to look at it again, you know? And so AI doesn't have moods as far as I can tell. And so it's also just good to be like, okay, I ran the numbers again this month and here's your customer sentiment and whatever. And here are some thoughts about how maybe that should influence who you're targeting, what you're selling, so on and so forth. Even if all it does is nudge you regularly, then at least it's done something meaningful. Because I think telling people to return to strategy, on a rolling basis, as you called it, is sometimes just difficult for the humans. We're going to talk let's talk about AI, and then I'm going to bring us back to human capabilities, because I think it's the mix of both that matters as well. So you spoke about the role of AI in allowing us to be agile in how we develop strategy. Where else do you see AI being able to support us in navigating uncertainty, and how people should be thinking about leveraging AI today? Because a lot of what I've heard from the people that we work with, from our clients and from our ecosystem, is actually that the crisis here is forcing them. Sometimes they should have done that before, as you said, but now they don't have a choice. Is forcing them to kind of have a bit of a tabula rasa approach and say, okay, I've been delaying this thing for the last year or two. I now have to think about how I'm bringing AI into my firm, because I'm downsizing anyways. I'm letting go of people. I'm going to need AI to plug some of these holes. So where do you think people need to be focusing today in terms of how AI can help them to navigate the coming uncertainty, other than the rolling process of strategy?
Yeah, I'll talk about three things. One is just like the quick wins that people can pursue, but one is where are the big wins, and the last one will then transition us back to people. What's this about human plus AI? Okay, so obviously the first thing is, this is just a whole bunch of tools and agents are coming out. So the first thing you can do is you can take your existing processes, like you were saying, what's happening with my customer sentiment? I need to make a LinkedIn post. You can take your existing processes and start plugging in these tools, and maybe unplugging some people or having fewer people. But the bigger thing to be aware of, and whenever you have these this is not the first super powerful general purpose technology that's hit humanity. There's been electricity and manufacturing, and we know some things about it. And we know that it's not just making a better loom when manufacturing comes in. That's the great about manufacturing. It's all the other products you can do, the whole way you can reconceptualize the system. So the more difficult work's going to come when you pull out a blank piece of paper and say, okay, what does a human capital function look like in a company? What is a marketing function? And that sort of fundamental redesign is going to be, it's going to take many organizations a while to get the confidence to fundamentally remake themselves. But that's going to be important. There's this old line, the future is here today, it's just not evenly distributed, right? And so classically, if you want to know what the future probably look like, go find AI scale-ups, right? So AI or ventures that are found in the last couple of years that are scaling, but with a blank piece of paper, and look at how they're building their functions with AI. It's super interesting. But then the last one is, how do we, it's the lives and livelihoods. How do we make this work for humans, right? And so again, as much as there's a lot of focus on, the economic incentives are there, how do we use AI to replace labor? There's also another game, which is, how do we use AI to make people better, make them better able to work with technology? That's, again, super motivating to me personally.
Yes, just this morning I was having a conversation about how org structures might evolve, and how we're starting to see, early, sometimes sensationalist content about putting agents into the org structure and so on. But I'm sure we will get there one day. I don't doubt it. But for now, I think it's mostly just a soundbite. Are there any firms that if any come off the top of your mind, where you think, those are 2 or 3 interesting companies that, as you say, were AI first or were built in the last 2 years? So even when they were conceptualized, that was part of the, the story that people might go and look at?
So again, there's that, example of the first $1 billion, 2-person company and how it played out.
Yeah.
Interesting, but no, I find, again, for me, it's the anecdotes. It's the former Google people building what were they building? They were building in Singapore, an escape room for leadership thing. So they're building their thing, but they looked at this was before the big SaaS apocalypse, but they looked at using HubSpot and they're like, I don't know, that's expensive. It's not. And so they just built their own CRM, right? So it's that, it's those anecdotes. And this was a year before suddenly everyone started selling short SaaS platforms. But again, right. you talk to the people in tech who have that blank piece of paper, and you'll see the things that they're doing. And again, they were using agents earlier and those things. So that's what I have in mind.
Yes. I mean, in the same way, I started Cosmic in April of 2020. So we were remote first and only for a really long time. So we were a great example for a firm wanting to learn how to build culture and structure and processes and so on in a fully remote, or GitHub or some of those examples at the time. I think we're in the same phase where it helps to become curious. If we're not going to copy it, obviously it's not about, doing exactly the same thing, but about learning how edge cases operate so that we can see what wisdom we can bring back into our own organizations. Maybe a couple of questions on the human side of this. So, of course, we are talking about how to better enable people and build their capabilities towards that. Are there specific skills that you now see, whether as a professor at INSEAD or specific competencies that you think are going to become essential? I'm going to give you an example, maybe just to inspire you. I read a LinkedIn post the other day. I forgot what that skill was called, but I'll explain what it was. So someone was saying that one of the things we're going to have to become really good at is making kind of our implicit internal processes. So if you take me as a consultant, I have a way of judging quality of a data source, the argument being made, the decision-making framework that we're suggesting, that is just the accumulation of years of experience. But I have to learn how to make that internal process explicit so that whether I have to explain it to an intern, by the way, or to AI, it's necessary. And that's going to be an important skill because that's a better way to brief AI and to get good outcomes from it. Do you see any other skills as emerging as being kind of core to this experience?
Yeah. Again, you can debate everything. So, that's a super valuable skill for some people to have in the economy. But then again, there's always going to be a question, does every organization need lots of those people? Or are there going to be a few people building products that do that for everybody in big platforms? So that's super important. One thing is if you think about production and how we talked earlier about the importance of trust in crises, but in organizations in general, we know trust is essential. Agents you don't have a relationship really with an agent, right? The AI, it can seem like it, but you're not really going to build the trust, the commitment that you have in human production systems. So one thing one would predict is that sort of centrality of relationships and trust is not going to go away anytime soon. Especially, again, as you need to adapt organizations, you're going to need some of that judgment and those relationships. So that's going to be huge. At the same time, you need a certain level of expertise to use these agents, but not necessarily the same depth, right? But again, you do need, you need a bit of expertise. As you know, if you go and hire consultants and you know nothing about what they do, it's not necessarily going to be great for you. It's much better if you know something about the domain you're engaging people, and that's your point as well. But the relationship thing we think is going to continue to be really strong. And so again, for us, one of the basic units of an organization is the conversation. How are people connecting and understanding and building transactions and trust over time? And I think that remains a huge human element to what we're looking at.
So actually, there was a question from the audience around trust. Marie asks, what's a leadership behavior that builds trust in uncertainty? You already told us communication, but is there a second one?
So I would, competence is key, right? So you need to signal that you understand what's going on. People are always looking for competence. I think openness, right? So one of the key challenges you have in a crisis is information flowing. Are people bringing you information? Have you created that kind of psychological safety throughout the organization where bad news is coming up? There's going to be more bad news in a crisis, and that's going to be even more important. Again, it's both. We've got people who are committed to the organization. We want it to be successful, and we're not afraid of covering up that we're missing our numbers in our area.
Yes, absolutely. We spoke about this over and over again. Claudia Zeisberger, your fellow INSEAD professor, brought that up on Monday too. The fastest route to bad news, essentially, is what you want to enable. Absolutely. And psych safety is a topic very close to our heart, as anyone who knows us knows. So thank you for bringing that up. Maybe I'll take a couple more questions from the audience, but we're reaching the end of our chat here. Another question here from Leah. How do you balance between short-term action and long-term thinking in uncertain moments?
So one of the first pieces is to unpack what does that mean. So in the case of COVID, it was understanding it's both about lives and livelihoods. It's really naming what you're caring about. So we care about economic output, or we care about our bottom line, but we're also going to care about customer retention. Whatever it is, you need to, just like any KPI system, balanced scorecard, you need to, again, what I said earlier, revisit your dashboard. What are the key things I need to manage today, and follow those? Because if you're not measuring it, you're going to very hard to manage it. So that's a classic, but it just needs to be adapted for the current situation.
Thank you so much for that, Peter. I'll take one last question from the audience, and then I have my own lightning round closing questions. Here's another one about AI. So what are some of the must-nots when it comes to AI and using it as a tool when making decisions in uncertain contexts? So what must we be careful with when it comes to bringing AI into the decision-making process?
So again, it is this alien intelligence, and sometimes it's magic and sometimes it's counterproductive. One of the ways it can be counterproductive is the negative interaction with people. So if people go to sleep and they're just not reviewing, it's generating all these emails, I'm just sending it out, I'm getting response, and I'm not, if you're going to sleep, it's going to be problematic because the AI is not perfect. And not only that, but you've got, again, to be learning. If you're not engaged and wrestling with this and thinking about, hey, what would a better process be? You're just going to get caught in a loop. So I really worry about, AI making humans dumber. So a bit of a negative spiral. It's not only individuals, but especially younger employees who aren't getting developed. And then we disengage and we have even less use of people, and it wouldn't end well.
Yeah, I really love that point. Actually, for example, we've been using ChatGPT since the day it was out, and then, for example, in our organization, I didn't buy a Claude license for the younger consultants because I'm like, I think of them as different interns that are good and bad at some things. And I think ChatGPT is great for like the quick and dirty answer, but everybody knows to double check what it tells you. Claude produces much more polished, complete outputs. And so they give you the illusion of correctness. And so I said, okay, junior consultants not allowed to use Claude because actually you're going to think it's good enough when it's not. And so I want you to develop your critical thinking skills. I do not want you to do something that produces something that seems polished, but the content may not always be. So I think putting some artificial guardrails maybe around how we use AI, and maybe just to I was going to ask you this question, and then I said, maybe we don't have time, but now you mentioned it. And so I think I have to. Talking about developing that kind of, pipeline of talent within a firm, we're seeing a lot of companies, I think wrongfully, but you can tell me what you think, just essentially cut off their junior staff entirely and say, oh, that's easy. We can just replace all these people with AI. Just what's your perspective on how to continue having a strong talent pipeline in firms?
Right. So that's going to be a short versus long-term issue, right? So in the short run, that might work well. It's going to have problems both at the firm level and at the macro level, right? So this is also someplace. Anyway, so firms. Well, okay. One of the challenges is one of the things that makes the economy go and makes our top talent is people have invested in themselves. They've gotten ahead. They've seen that. They invest more. There are a ton of young people who are told, for example, to go learn coding because that would be a sure thing, and have invested in coding and suddenly discover, oh no, we don't need those skills anymore. How? And that you have a whole generation that could decouple. Okay, what does that mean though for individual firms? It suddenly means when you think you're going to go and hire these senior workers 3 or 4 years ago, they're not going to be there because no one's developing them. If you can keep developing those people, again, you're going to be a magnet for talent. If people believe there's lots and lots of really high quality young people who are available, if you can figure out how to leverage them, be an employer of choice, you've got an amazing pickings. And if you're patient, you develop them 3 to 5 years, you will have those key talent who you can build a business on. But again, that's where I said, you've got to rethink things. This is not just about tweaking your existing human capital function. This is rethinking what does it mean to develop young people for an age of AI. And we all need to work on that.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sure there's a bit of game theory amongst people developing them and then having other people reap the benefit and figuring out how to keep the value within the firm for sure. Thank you so much for that, Peter. We are now coming close to the end of our time. I learned so much, and this was really enjoyable, honestly. And we have a last 4 questions that we ask all of our speakers to extract just that tiny bit more wisdom before we wrap up for today. So if you're ready, the first question is, and it's really for you personally, but what keeps you grounded in moments of uncertainty?
I think people's ego gets in the way of things. I think one thing I try and always do is think about what I'm doing for society. Like, why am I doing this? What am I giving back? If I think about my life, I'm in many ways incredibly privileged. So I have no excuse not to be thinking about that. But again, it also keeps me grounded.
Thank you. That's a great reminder. And what is it that helps you to stay limitless, to remain curious, to keep imagination alive?
Yeah. So I'm someone who naturally has a good imagination. I can sort of envision a future world, whether it's, INSEAD could be in San Francisco, or we could have these new learning cases with VR or whatever. But then what's great is making it happen. It's that journey where you're trying to create this vision, and it's learning along the way, right? It's never a straight line to what you imagined, and there's always twists and turns, and so it's just enjoying that journey is what keeps me focused on the future.
I love that. And you live in the region, you're in Abu Dhabi right now, you've spent some time studying leadership here. What is a leadership quality from the UAE and the Arab world that the rest of the world can learn from?
So again, when it works well, the Arab world, especially here, it's got strong leadership from the top, but consultative. And so there's 2 key things you need to do well. One is definitely the stakeholder side, and that's very traditional in Arab world, but also the thing we talked about earlier, bringing in the expertise. So again, I don't want to go too far on this, but the great tragedy in the US is you have very strong leadership that seems to have been rather divorced from expertise, certainly in some of the recent moves. So I think, and that's something I think the UAE in particular has developed well, their national experts program and such. So there you go.
Beautiful. That's a great one. Yeah, shura is what we call it in Arabic. The consultative process is deeply ingrained into culture here. And then last question, Peter, based on everything we spoke about today, what are the top 3 things that you would advise leaders to do right now in terms of managing the ongoing crisis?
Okay, yeah, you're just prepared for turbulence. So this is a great learning moment. Just like I said with in Dubai, the people who thrive today are going to be your leaders of tomorrow. For you at the top, you really just got to think about what I said earlier, those intangibles. Yes, you're driving business results, but you've got to think about the key intangibles, the culture, the commitment of the people, the trust they have in you. Those aren't just nice to have. In a crisis, that's the difference between thriving and not. And then the other thing is take a look at all, if you're especially in a big organization, what are all that bureaucratic stuff that you have and the energy that goes into risk management and crisis management and health and safety? And could you be doing, again, reimagine that, use AI. How could you build resilience with the resources you're already putting in by doing that better?
Beautiful. Great advice. Thank you so much, Peter, again, for so generously jumping on board with this session and sharing all of your great experience and learnings from across all of the work you've done, and particularly the UAE Crisis Playbook. We're incredibly grateful for that.
Thank you, Marilyn, for having me. It was a joy talking with you.
Yeah, likewise. And thanks for everyone who's tuned in and for your questions. We didn't get to answer all of them, but hopefully we got through a few and you were able to satisfy your curiosity. This session will be available shortly on YouTube as a podcast as well on our website. So if you want to re-listen to it and share it with someone in your network who might benefit, please do pass it along. As I asked in the beginning, if you do have 4 minutes today to give us, we'd love for you to contribute to our research on leading in the Arab world. The team will drop the link once more in the chat here. We have 3 more conversations before the conference wraps up. And our next one is tomorrow with Loïc Moutot, who used to be, up until a couple of weeks ago, the global CEO of Mars Pet Care. He's a global advisor, a board member, a non-executive director, and he is joining us for a session titled Resilient and Ready, which is actually going to look at how global organizations think about managing the continuous crisis, and really going to unpack the very specific processes and ways of working that they have put in place in order to enable that at a global level. And that's going to be tomorrow, April 16th at 12 p.m. Dubai time. And I really look forward to seeing you all. Thank you again for being with us, and we hope to see you in our next session.